Thank you. So it's really an honor to be here. Thank you very much for having me back. I will certainly endeavor to make it worth your while. On the subject of being here not about 10 years ago, just a couple weeks back, about a month ago, somebody showed up at Fluidigm who I immediately recognized. It was somebody from my dorm. Actually, I lived in Potter when I was a junior. And I walk up, and unbeknownst to me, this person had just been hired at Fluidigm. And so I walk up to this person, I'm like, "Hey, Jeff, how you doing? It's really great to see you." And he stared at me blankly, like, blink, blink. I'm like, "Don't you remember me? Gajus, I was in your dorm." Like, sorry, don't remember you at all. So that may be the theme here, which is to say that with the title like Thought Leaders, I'm unfortunately miscast. I'm nobody's idea of a thought leader. But I do know a thing or two about taking action, and I do know a thing or two about leadership, and that's what I'll be focusing most of my talk about. Also, I want to give you a sense for the history of Fluidigm, because that's really the story, really, of coming from a really bleeding-edge technology, something that was fresh and raw out of a leading laboratory in Caltech, and making a real company out of it. So it began actually here at Stanford, but not in the way you might imagine. Steve Quake and I, pictured here, some years later, were classmates in Doug Osheroff's mid-level physics laboratory course. And what happened was that Doug said, well, this year there's going to be a new experiment. Nobody's ever done it before, but it should be interesting. And independently, Steve Quake and another gentleman named Neil Switz, the three of us gravitated to this experiment. And as a result of pounding our heads against this for about 10 weeks, unsuccessfully, I might add, we became really good friends. And what's more, we established a bond of respect. It was clear from the beginning of my interaction with Steve Quake that he was one of these people who is really destined for greatness. And I'm sure you've met people like that here at Stanford. There are a few of them that you can just tell from the beginning are bound for great things. And Neil Switz, who I'll talk about later, was just somebody who would not quit. And the three of us forged a bond, which is really the reason why Fluidigm got started. That was way back in about 1989. About 10 years later, I got a very auspicious email from Steve Quake. I had been on my sort of self-imposed training program to figure out how to build a company, because though I don't like James Joyce, I'll borrow from him. I had an epiphany while I was here at Stanford as an undergrad. I knew when I was 19 that I wanted to build a company. And I can't tell you why that is. I grew up a kid in Alaska and in a really a remote place, and I had no business knowing that, but I knew it. And so for 10 years, I tried to figure out how to make that real. And about the time that I thought it was time to do it, Steve sent me this email and said, read at your own risk, basically. I read it, and it was his first publication to come out of Caltech that was something fundamental. And immediately, I was both hooked and really disappointed, because Steve is in Caltech at Pasadena, and I, coming from Alaska, was bound and determined never to move any far south than I had already. So I called Steve up and I said, "Steve, this looks great, but I cannot move to LA. I cannot do this with you." And he's like, "You idiot, put the company wherever you want, but let's do it." It didn't take me long to decide to do this, because I believe so strongly in Steve, even though the technology was far from working, far, far, far from working. And also during that time, you may remember, or you may have read, that was the height of the dot-com era, or anything that was getting funded had a dot-com after it. Biotech was absolutely in the toilet. Anything that smelled like biotech was, it was old school.